uh, definitely we will post those online so someone could access those as well. Just a quick heads up for the next one that's next Tuesday, which is navigating tricky topics and tough questions. That one's really, you know, when a young person comes with that question that really throws an adult off guard a little, or they just don't know how to answer, a deeper dive into some good practices to really answer questions in a healthy way. So we do have some guidelines we'd like everyone to follow and be aware of. Really helps with sexuality, where we're all coming with different comfort levels. We're all coming with different experiences, different values, to really create a space where everyone can engage and grow and learn together. So just a few things: take care of yourself. There is no built-in stretch break or water break or bathroom break. So whatever you need, take care of yourself. Be open to learning new things, to new ideas as you're here. Ask questions. Again, the way to do that is to chat the host directly. This is a no judgment space. Be aware of that. Assume best intentions from everybody and what is said in the space, as we are discussing things that for some people, different topics are less comfortable, or they just have a more difficult time receiving or hearing the information. And then finally, take notes. So we recommend both taking notes of information, but also writing down, you know, if something is kind of that aha moment. What's that piece that you had never thought of when engaging with a young person? How are you feeling? Is there a certain topic that's making you feel less comfortable and you feel would be more difficult to talk to with a young person? So take those notes so that you also are walking away with something to continue to feel comfortable moving forward, having these conversations with young people.
All right, so we're gonna get started with the actual workshop. So we're gonna start with a little bit of time travel. So I'm gonna take you back to the 1980s. Little Dion is about 7 years old. I'm outside running around all the time, play fighting, playing football, getting dirty. I was not a girly little child, but my mother tried to buy me girly things, try to pull me over to the girly side. So one of the things that she bought me was a purse. And I quickly took that purse and turned it into an ammo bag. And I filled it with my bullets for my ammo. And I didn't think that was weird for a couple things. One, I was just like a rough little child. But two, I thought all adults just carried bullets in their purse. My mother always had bullets in her purse. Just seemed like something an adult did. Until the day my mom looked in my purse and asked me why I was carrying around tampons. And I didn't know what tampons were. I was 7. And in my memory, I'm in like this arena with like hundreds of people laughing at me. Like, of course, I was just in my living room and there were probably 2 people in there, but they probably were laughing at me. And this is how I found out about periods. My mother probably didn't think she was going to be explaining periods to her 7-year-old child by telling her that these tampons are not bullets. They're actually OB tampons, and this is what it looks like without an applicator. My mother probably thought, you know, there's going to be a time in a couple of years where I sit my daughter down and I tell her, you know, you're about to change. There's going to be wonderful changes going on in your body. Once a month, you're going to start menstruating. You're going to be a young woman. And instead, she had to have a conversation about why tampons were not bullets. And that's real life. That's what happens. TV lies to us. TV makes us think that this talk happens in a specific way, and it's a perfect way, right? When we look at the talk on TV, the talk happens one time, and it's pretty quick talk. And it covers just basic reproduction, like where do babies come from? The parent is so confident. The parent sits their child down. They're normally the same gender as their child, and they have this very well-informed conversation where they're just really prepared. And the child is really receptive. The child is sitting there attentively. They don't have a phone in their hand. They're not trying to get back to a video game. They want to listen. And they're in a quiet place. They are in a bedroom. They are at a dining room table. They are somewhere where they can have privacy. That is not what happens in real life. In real life, the talk happens over and over and over and again. And it covers a wide variety of subjects. Oftentimes the parent is completely caught off guard, right? And they're just trying to fix their face real quick and try to act like they are not caught off guard, but this is not an awkward question. And the child is enjoying it. They love shock questions. They're enjoying like watching their parents squirm a little bit. And this doesn't happen in privacy. This thing happens, this topic is brought up at the grocery store while someone's in line. A little kid looks at their mom and says, "What's a blowjob? I heard about it on a TV show." You're driving in a car and the child asks you, "What's an orgasm?" You're on a Zoom conference call for work when someone asks you where the kittens came from. But this is life. This is how the talk works, right?
Yeah, and although, we can't prepare you for every topic or every question that comes up in the car, or in the Zoom meeting, or in the grocery store, or wherever, we can give you tools during this session to help turn these awkward conversations into healthy and supportive conversations. So let's talk about that first lie, which is this idea that there is the talk. Now, we want to shift away from that mentality and have adults really rethink and move into the fact that in order to talk about sexuality, there's going to be a lot of mini discussions. There's going to be several discussions about one topic. A young person and an adult might talk about something, and the next day the young person comes back and wants to talk about the exact same thing. The talk also is problematic because it doesn't really imply a back and forth. The talk is more an idea that an adult talks and provides information, and a young person sits there and listens, and that's it. As opposed to what it really is, which is a discussion, a place for both individuals to share their thoughts and listen to each other. The talk also doesn't really set up the expectation of clarity. If you watch in TV talks, it's very much at the end of it, okay, everything's solved, or this was a little awkward, but let's never speak of it again. With mini talks, you get to come back with questions. The adult gets to say, "I'll look that up," or "Let's look that up together," and come back with more information. And then the final biggest thing is the talk could never possibly encompass everything that is within the wide range of sexuality. But several little talks over time, little talks or talks that last longer, but as long as they're reoccurring, they're able to cover so many more topics than just the standard reproduction, sexual health, few things that are often associated with the talk. So the other element, right, is that with these mini discussions that an adult has to have with a young person about sexuality is the fact that sexuality and identity are changing. They change and they develop over our lives. So these conversations start young and they continue to go as a young person is going through the stages of their development. Mini talks also allow us to cover the complexity of sexuality. So here are just 5 elements or topics within sexuality that often come up and everybody experiences. Intimacy, that is how close we feel we want to be with people in our relationships. It has to do with how much we want to self-disclose. Little kids say everything about themselves. They have no filter. Teenagers, they tend to want to have some secrets to themselves. That's just a change in their development as this element of their sexuality. Sexual health and reproduction, right? That is, how does a person take care of their sexual health? This is STIs, birth control, sexual behavior. Often, this is what gets focused on during talks. But it is an important element, but it's not the only element. It's something that adults need to talk about. I don't want anyone to walk away and say, well, we talk about it, but they said that other stuff needs to be talked about, so we'll just put sexual health on the back burner. No, but it's one element. Sensuality, so this is somebody's body image. This is somebody's sense of their arousal, of pleasure to them, a variety of things. I usually associate the development of this one with the fact that a little kid will run around naked, no concern of who can see them, no sense that it's stigmatized to show your body off in public, but a teenager is getting all kinds of messaging about what a body should look like. and what is a correct body from the media. Power and sexualization. This is looking at relationships and deciding and figuring out what does power look like in a healthy relationship dynamic. This is sexualized media, which young people are very, very aware of and trying to navigate. Having an adult help them navigate that's very important. And then sexual identity. So this is gender identity, sexual orientation, and the variety of identities that fall within sexuality. Now, what's important for adults to also realize is for a lot of young people, this is developing and they might not have labels to put on it. But having an adult who's there to be supportive as they're figuring out their identities and they're putting words to how they feel about their identity, to have a support system there.
So sexuality is complex, but you do not need to be an expert. You do not have to know what every letter means in LGBTQIA to show someone support. I mean, just showing support might be asking someone questions about their identity. It might be looking up information and then saying, hey, I just learned about this and I would love to have a conversation. That is showing that you care enough to go learn about it on your own, to educate yourself. You don't need to know every single STI to encourage someone to use condoms and get tested regularly. Honestly, I love talking about STIs. I know that it kind of depresses people, but I love the education. I think it's really important to know different things about your body. But my biggest takeaway when I do my lessons on sexually transmitted infections is prevention and testing. You can prevent STIs by using condoms, and getting tested is a really important way. The only way to know you have an STI is getting tested. So if you're giving these two messages to your child, you're giving them the most important messages about STIs. You don't need to understand how birth control works in the body to help someone make an appointment, because really birth control works differently for everyone. So it's important for someone, if they're interested in birth control, to be able to talk to a clinician about that. But also, I have talked to so many college students who have told me that they have avoided healthcare, have avoided getting just regular dental appointments because they've never had to make their own doctor's appointment, and it terrifies them. So walking someone through that while they're still young is really amazing. It's a great skill to give them. And finally, you don't have to be in a perfect relationship to discuss unhealthy behaviors. I think a lot of times as adults, we're afraid we're going to get called out by young people. We talk to them about how a relationship should be in terms of healthy and unhealthy. And that's okay. Young people love to call out adults. Young people love to call out each other. That is fine. We are teaching them how to respond when we get called out. And how to respond is simply to say, the most important thing is to be able to identify unhealthy behaviors and then talk about how to make that behavior more healthy. So we are going to do our first Zoom poll. And now I'm going to ask you to kind of take a step back into your childhood and really think about where you receive messages about sex and sexuality. Carrie's going to put it up on the screen and we'll give you probably about 20-30 seconds to fill it out. Wonderful. We are in the future. Look at this. All right, just waiting on a few more people. I'll give you about 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And I'm going to share the results with everyone. So the first question was, as a child, I got most of my information about sexuality from, and it looks like we're seeing most people talking about some form of media and their parents, which is interesting because this is actually, you know, very common for as a child to be able to reach out to or to have their parents as their primary source of information. But, you know, as young people are more familiar with like online sources, we're going to see more and more kind of like media, right? Um, as a teenager, I got most of my information about sexuality from so look, we kind of completely fell off with parents. We only had 3% of people that were looking towards their parents for that information. And now we have over 50% of people that are looking for their peers, getting information from their peers. And this is really important because when kids are younger, they ask a lot of questions. There was actually a study where they said that 4-year-olds ask 200 to 300 questions a day. That is a lot of questions. But as teenagers are developing, they're still having questions, but they're not necessarily going to their parents. They're going to media, they're going to peers. And so it's really important for us as adults to start those conversations.
So that brings us in, right, to talk about the second TV lie here, which is the fact that, you know, waiting for the right age or the perfect age, which usually is a teenager if we look at media or we hear people or talk about the talk. But in reality, conversations, curiosity, questions from young people, as Dion mentioned, very normal part of development. So having the talks earlier and answering questions that young people might have earlier is perfectly healthy, perfectly normal, as opposed to just waiting for them to be a teenager. Now, having said that, if someone's on here tonight and after this you feel this is when you're going to start conversations with a teenager in your life, that's great too. There is no, oh, I missed my window because I didn't talk to a young person starting when they were 3 years old. No worries. Starting is always a great place to start. I know that sounds a little redundant, but I love that expression because it's how you start, and you have to start these conversations at some point.
So as Carrie said, you know, curiosity starts very young. We are developing our sexual identities throughout our entire lives. You know, even as young as a toddler. As toddlers, most of you have, you know, been around toddlers, and you notice that they're very curious about their bodies. They're very curious about other people's bodies. They're looking, they're touching, they're comparing body parts. When they get a little bit older, they start asking questions around reproduction. They start asking that age-old question, where do babies come from? They start asking about how certain body parts function, and they're very curious about gender. They're really looking towards adults to really understand their own gender and looking at the gender expression around them, seeing who they identify with. And sexual education should start really young. It should start at a very, very young age. A toddler can understand a lot of the things that I'm going to say right now, such as correcting for body parts. I was in the car with my nephew when he was like 2 years old, riding with my brother when he said, my penis hurts. And my brother turned around and said, oh, is your diaper too tight? And it was such a normal thing for him to just call his penis that correct name. And that was a body part that hurt, and he was able to communicate that to my brother, and my brother was able to try to fix that, right? Safe touch versus unsafe touch. It's something that we should be teaching very young kids, and teaching them that if anyone touches you in a way that makes you feel unsafe, to talk to a trusted adult about that. Understanding consent. Very, very little kids can understand the concept of don't touch people that don't want to be touched. It's not okay if people touch you if you don't want to be touched by them. And discussions on puberty, just preparing our young children for those changes that are about to happen in their bodies.
Yeah, and then as young people shift into the puberty years, which really we're setting around about 9 through the end of high school, a lot of those later stages of puberty don't really end until those really later teen years. For some people, early 20s. I think for some adults that is news and they think, oh, well, these changes are only really happening to a young person in this very short window. But as they're going through puberty, things are changing about what they want to know about, where they're seeking information, and what that looks like for a young person. So there's still continued curiosity about bodies, but potentially where they're getting their messaging about bodies is changing. So for instance, we talked about media having a bigger impact. So now all of a sudden it's looking at Instagram models potentially to compare bodies instead of the other little kids on the playground and saying, what do you have? I have this. So all of a sudden it's shifting to comparing on a wider range of individuals. And then get a deeper sense of what body parts do and how they function, right? Because their body parts are changing. For instance, you wake up with an erection, that can be scary for a young person to start with. That's different for their bodies and how they're functioning. So they're curious about those changes. Exploring sexual orientation, trying to figure out what it means to be attracted to someone, to have romantic, emotional feelings that are different. Awareness of sexual media. A lot of that sexual media might have negative messaging. Now, we think of teenagers a lot of times as being very technologically savvy or technologically aware, but there's a big difference between being able to use a phone really well and being able to process the sexual media that they are seeing. So there's a big difference. So just because a young person can get online doesn't mean they know how to tell fake from real or have the media literacy skills yet. And then another huge thing is peer approval. And this can be a big change for a lot of adults in a young person's life because young people are still very curious and want to know information about sexuality. But if they're going to their peer group now or other sources, sometimes adults think, well, I'm not getting asked questions a lot, so maybe they don't really want to know anything, or maybe they already know it. So when a young person starts those preteen and then teenage years, it might be more on the adult to be pushing for these conversations where their young person used to come to them with a lot of questions. Because their interest in topics and sexual health topics are going to be there, whether they feel comfortable asking the adult in their life currently those questions or not. So right now, I did get one question. We just wanted to build in a little bit of space. So I'm gonna read it out loud very, very quickly here. So it's a lot of people use condoms incorrectly, and explaining how to use one properly may make both parents and their children feel really uncomfortable. Any advice on how to approach this conversation? So the first thing I would say to that is have conversations about condoms earlier, about protection and prevention earlier. I think a lot of adults want to have that conversation after they maybe think their young person has become sexually active. I know personally for me that conversation happened after a condom fell out of a pocket in the washing machine, and that's when my mom was like, okay, I guess it's time to tell my son what condoms are. At that point, it's like potentially a person is looking for them or already is accessing them. So it's important to have those conversations early and just be very open and honest about what a condom is and its purpose. There's a lot of things that is messaging that's tied to condoms that has nothing to do with using them correctly. It's like so many things. We teach young people in case they are going to need to use something, as opposed to just because we're 100% sure they're going to need it. Do you have any thoughts, Dion, to add to that?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about, there's some really great videos on YouTube about how to put on a condom, and there are some really bad ones too. So I would, if you're looking for them, of course, watch them before showing them your child. Planned Parenthood also has some really good youth-friendly videos. And one affiliate, they are in a school system where they're not allowed to bring condoms. And so they created a video about how to put on a sock properly. And they go through the steps of putting on a condom with a sock. And it's really funny. So sometimes it's really good to be able to talk about sexual health in a more like humoristic way. And that kind of breaks the ice, and it allows for a little bit more conversation when you're allowing that topic to be goofy.
And then one more, Dion, really quick. This one's a little long. I'm going to try to get it. So I've inherited 2 great kids through my partner, and their sexual education, I suspect, has been patchy. Not alone. Lots of young people are getting kind of a patchy sexual education. Currently go through the fact-based approach, but have not been able to start young. How do I dive into these topics now? And then as a step parent, how do I respect the boundaries of their biological parent? You want to start this one? That's a great question.
It is a great question. And honestly, I would start that conversation with the adults and ask them what their values are around sexual health. And we're about to get into a more values conversation. But I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and my sister has, you know, certain limitations that my brother might not have, or my brother might have certain limitations that my sister might not have. So I do try to, you know, respect their limitations, but also ask them, you know, how much can I tell? Because I want to be able to educate, you know, the young people around me. And I love talking about sexual health. So it's something that I really want to be able to start those conversations and spread that information.
And then the only thing I would add to that, if you're going with a fact-based approach on things and trying not to sort of impart your own values as much because of the fact that there are other biological parents involved, is really use the resources of, so like the National Sexuality Education Standards are a great resource to really step-by-step know at what age conversations can be happening at, what type of information. Those are things of that really help sort of establish and then allows you to go to the biological parent and say, you know, this is really what at this age, the developmental stage, and this is where we can start having these conversations. As far as it goes when it comes to just jumping in as well, like I said, start small. Don't feel like you have to all of a sudden tackle every topic and everything, but little bits, little pieces. And we'll actually go with some strategies later on as we go through the rest of this webinar.
Absolutely. Okay, so another Dion story, and kind of Dion's mom's story also. So my mother has the loudest sneezes I have ever heard in my life. They're like thunderous sneezes. And about 5 years ago, I just suddenly sneezed like my mom. Just out of nowhere, my whole body shook. My cats ran out of the room. It was horrible. Huge, loud sneeze. And ever since then, I have been sneezing that way. And the crazy thing is, it took me until 35 years old. I was sneezing for 35 years. I was sneezing like a normal person. And then suddenly I turned into this like sneezing monster. My mom's a perfectly nice woman, but she sneezes like a monster. So it really got me thinking about other things that are passed down to us that we often don't even realize until we're older. Things that we pick up from our parents that don't come out until we're in our 30s, that don't come out until we're in our late 20s. And really being able to like reflect on that. You know, I'm never going to be able to sneeze like a normal person again, but I can think about like, what are some messages that I got that I don't necessarily want to pass on to my child? Or maybe there are some things that in my family, it was difficult to talk about, but I find very important and I want to be able to talk to young people about. And so our next poll is really just taking time to explore what your priorities are around your messages to your young person. What do you want to make sure your young person takes away from your conversations? What values do you want to impart in them? So we're going to go ahead and start a poll. There's this is a multiple answer, so choose up to 3 different answers of what is really your priority in your sexuality messages.
And I'm sorry, I just realized I wrote 2, but choose 3.
people are selecting, I will read through the answers or through the options. It is okay to experience pleasure, arousal, and desire. All bodies are good bodies. Consent is an essential part of interactions. Discussing sexuality is healthy. Sexuality changes as a person grows and develops. Different identities and sexualities should be respected. And if you choose other, we would love it if you chatted the host and for like a quick description of what the other is. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds. Okay, wonderful. So let's see what came about. Oh, wow, amazing. So I love that consent was 94%. That is awesome. I don't know how many of you were actually talked to about consent, but I did not hear the word consent until I was probably in college. So amazing that this is something that is a big priority in messaging. I'm also seeing experience pleasure, arousal, and desire. That's really great too, because when we talk about sexual health, we often leave out that pleasure side. Discussing sexuality is healthy, which is absolutely true. And Carrie, do you have an other?
Yeah, pornography isn't a realistic representation of what sexual behavior looks like.
Yes, and that's a topic that is coming up more and more, right? People, children as young as like elementary school have smartphones in their hands. They have access to videos that we did not see until we were teenagers or adults. So it is something that needs to be brought up a lot sooner. Stop sharing.
Yeah, so when we talk about values and we look at our poll, right, all of those are values that really for every adult is important to reflect on, because when we talk about sexuality, so many elements of sexuality are values based. There's a lot of information that is just factual, but a lot of the discussions that are had with young people are passing values down. So as we saw in the poll, right, there was a lot of overlap, but also for some people, certain ones were more important than others. And that's important to reflect on because of how that affects what we talked about with a young person and what information we're going to share with a young person. So, right, values, just so we're all on the same page again, they're just a person's set of principles and what they consider important. As I mentioned, they're very, very much involved with sexuality. They get passed down through family and cultural norms, those expectations of how someone should act or how someone should feel. It's key, though, when we look at young people, values are changing. They change for adults too, but adults have had a much longer time to really establish their values. For young people, it's not uncommon for them to be adamant about how they feel about something one day, and then they saw a TV episode and they're adamant the next day in a completely different way about the same type of value and the same topic. So as an adult, having a lot of conversations, be prepared to expect that. Be prepared that you might one day talk about a value and the next week it's totally different. That's normal. That is healthy within how young people are processing the information. And then they shape the way we see right or wrong, and they shape what we consider to be normal behavior. I see this a lot in schools where I will talk about sexual behavior, certain sexual behaviors, for instance, that spread STIs. And I get a lot of pushback on what is normal or gross or different. And those are just values things. Those are not factual statements because of the variety in preferences. And then, you know, the other thing with values is they're going to affect how we communicate. I mentioned this a little, right? Will our answers be factual when we talk to a young person? Are they going to be comprehensive? If we have values about an answer, are we going to share the fact that other people have very different values? And are we going to introduce that young person to that different value? And then also, biases happen in all of our values. Everybody has biases because we believe our values to be important to us. So it's not that biases are a bad thing. It's just we need to be aware of our biases when we reflect on our values. So if we look at this example right here, right, a child asks their parent how old a person should be the first time they have sex. And a parent just responds with, a person's old enough, they are old enough when they are married. Now, this is a very values-based answer, right? It's not based in fact, because it's not a fact that someone can only start to have sex when they get married. It's not comprehensive because the answer cuts off and doesn't say, some people feel that sex should happen when they are ready, no matter the age, or when they talk to a partner and both partners are consenting to engage in sexual activity. And then it's biased by the fact that in this answer, this parent is viewing that sexuality is going to be based and sexual behavior is going to be based around marriage.
So our values also affect the way we listen and we receive information. Do we trust the information that we're receiving? Do we respect the person that we're speaking to? If the information goes against our values, are we still open to learning something from this person? So for this example, a parent is responding to a child who is newly identifying as bisexual. So how would the response be if that child was 10 years old versus 16? How would that be different if the child was 16 versus 20? Would that person, their values would really respect the 10-year-old's identity versus the 20-year-old's identity? Would that be different? And how would that be different if, say, this was a son or a daughter communicating this to the parent? A lot of times we also just really confuse values and facts. So when we think about values and facts, of course, a value is that cultural thing, right? While a fact is more objective. So this other example, going back to a couple slides ago, how old should a person be when the first time they have sex? So that marriage answer was very values, so that was like very clearly a value statement, but there are a couple of statements that sometimes someone might think is a factual statement, but it's actual a value statement. So like saying something like, you're not old enough to have sex. Someone might think there is a certain age people should be having sex, and it is not 15, and that is a fact, but it's not a fact, it's an opinion. Teenagers make bad parents. Not all teenagers make bad parents. That is an opinion, that is a value. A fact would be there's no specific legal or biological age when people are ready to have sex. And later on, we'll talk about being able to make a factual answer, but also following up with a value.
So great. So really quick, we're going to do another poll where this first one is just a very simple question, which is the definition of sex, so when we think about having sex as the behavior, a value or a fact? So I'm going to give you a short time. It's only one question, so just about 10 seconds. Try to get your answers in. I'm hoping it's working for everyone.
Right at 50-50 right now.
Oh, there we go. Awesome. So I'm going to give you 3, 2, 1. Awesome. So as we share the results, we actually had 59% of fact, 41% of value, which is very interesting as we look at this, because that is something we see a lot, is a clear sort of split element when we talk about this. So then the next thing we're going to do is I want you now to answer this next question, which is, I define sex as, and then you can see there's a handful of options. When a man inserts his penis into a woman's vagina, when a man inserts his penis into another person's vagina or anus, when one person inserts a body part or object into another person's vagina or anus, when two genitals make contact, when two genitals make contact longer than 30 seconds, when someone's genitals make contact with other genitals, the anus or mouth, when someone attempts to give another person an orgasm, sexual pleasure. I thought I knew, but now there are too many options. Oh, I thought I had more breath in me, Dion. I'm so sorry. It was flow at the end there.
So
Thank you
close.
for being with me. All right, so we're getting flow in here. We're seeing, a lot of people who are going with the pleasure answer to start. We're seeing a good chunk, not sure, too many options. Seeing people with one person inserts a body part into the vagina or anus. All right, so I'm gonna end here. I have one person in chat who says all of the above. I like that. So I'm gonna end it in 3, 2, 1. Awesome. So if we look at our results here, the key right is there's a lot of variety. So the takeaway from this is we didn't come to an agreement. We weren't able to just say what sex is a fact. It's a known fact. Everybody agrees because it's a value question. And so many elements of sexuality, even what seems really simple and straightforward and definable, is actually of value.
Okay, so if a group of adults do not have the same definition of sex, then imagine how different the definition of sex is for young people. And so when we're talking about young people about sex, we have to be very explicit about what we're talking about, because we may think that sex is a certain thing and they think it's something else. We may consider anal sex or oral sex to be sex. A young person may not. So we have to be really careful with our wording and actually talk about, like, when we say sex, what do we mean by that? And asking young people, what do they think sex is? Of course, there is no one thing that young people say, but I will tell you that I hear some very common things from young people. And one of them is, it's not sex if you only put in the tip. Oral sex is just like making out. I've heard that from adults too. My girlfriend got tested, so I don't have to. So a lot of young people believe that as long as one person in the relationship is getting sexual health, that means both of them are. And of course, we should all be taking care of our own sexual health right now. And then I heard on Instagram or social media or whatever, I cannot tell you how much misinformation young people pick up online and think that it is factual. And that is why it is so important for us to be able to have those healthy conversations and be able to bring these things up and be able to work through these topics.
So yeah, so the next thing, right, is with all these mini conversations, I hear from adults a lot, or teachers a lot, or educators, when do I have them? If I'm supposed to have a lot of little conversations, when? The days are busy, how do I sit down a young person? Use everyday examples and times to spark discussion. That's a huge part of this. It doesn't have to be a sit-down conversation. Young people, as they develop, those are great times to just mention things. You notice they're a little bit taller. You notice breasts are budding. You notice something is different about their developmentally. Family events, right? An older sibling is crying in their room because they broke up with someone. That's a great opportunity to console and talk to that older sibling, but also a younger sibling about why and what relationships look like and why they can lead to, sadness. Media current events, watching TV, right? With my nephew, one time we were just watching and 2 people were holding hands and he told me, oh, that's really gross. Why would 2 people hold hands? And so then we got to talk about all kinds of elements about, again, intimacy and about closeness and touch and consent. The news, events at school, right? People would have dance going forward, things like that. There was an opportunity. Now you see a young person's texting with a new friend all the time. That's a good opportunity to ask what they're texting about, how to be digitally safe. There's all these opportunities that come up in life to start a conversation. And the key is they might not go great, and that's okay. Trying shows a young person that you want to have the conversations, and that's a big win. Because then they're just a little bit more comfortable maybe next time, and the conversation will go a little bit better, and then a little bit better and a little bit better until you're really having consistently what you consider great conversations. So a few best practices as well. There's no like set formula for having a great conversation, but some things that can go really well. First big one that I try to bring to every conversation I have with a young person is validation. Validate, validate, validate. Show them that you appreciate you can have the conversation. Show them that you want to have the conversation and that you're thankful that they are bringing their voice and asking you or talking to you about it. Stay calm and positive. They may say something you're surprised by or something that's completely different than your value. That's okay. And share feelings and or your memories. So it helps a lot for young people when they're trying to figure out what are potential outcomes of something to talk to an adult who maybe has experienced that, but also be aware and think about what you're comfortable sharing. Be an active listener, ask open-ended questions, right? So being a listener and giving a young person space when you do ask a question allows them to really get to the heart of how they feel about something or what they want to know about something, as opposed to a closed question where it's just like they can say yes or no and then hope that the conversation doesn't happen because they're a little bit uncomfortable. Clarify and confirm. So adults see things through adult lenses. So really make sure that you are answering the question that is being asked, right? So you want to really clarify what is being asked of you, what information they really want. And then ask follow-up questions. Any conversation can start with one topic and move into other topics. So that is a valuable thing to do. Well, what do you also think about this? What do you think about this other element? Is there anything else you want to know about that? And then all of a sudden the floodgates open and they go, oh yeah, I actually have 40 questions about this. And then discuss and decipher values versus facts, both your own and what the young person's looking for, and then offer trusted sources. So even if they're not engaging with you, you can get them to a place where they are at least going to a source that is valid and has good, correct information.
Wonderful. So we are going to move through the best practices with an example question. A child asked their parent how old they were the first time they had sex. So some parents might be offended by this. They might think, they're just trying to get me mad. They're trying to ask too much information. But remember, you always start with validation. That is a good question. And you know what? We sometimes jump to the conclusion of what they're actually asking. So clarify. Are you asking because you want to know the age that people begin having sex?
So, and then again, open-ended questions. So do you think there's a specific age people should begin having sex? And then why, right? You want to push them out of just being able to say, oh yeah, it's 15. You want them to say, why do you think that? Because that'll really enlighten you as an adult into where they're coming from with that answer. So also share values and facts. It's easy to put both into one answer, right? So for this instance, there's no biological age people should begin having sex, but it's important to feel ready for the experience, like knowing about condoms, birth control, and how to get tested. That includes both the factual element and then also personal values about being ready and what things someone should do to prepare.
And then sharing a feeling or a memory. I'm glad you brought this up. When I was your age, we didn't discuss sex at home, and I was confused about a lot of the same topics. So also just being relatable so that they understand that you've been through those feelings before. And then ask follow-up questions. They're already interested in sex, so let's see, maybe they're interested in learning about condoms right now. Do you want to discuss condoms? I'd be happy to tell you how to use them. And even if they say no, that's a little bit too much right now, at least they know that you're ready to have that discussion with them and you want to have that discussion with them.
All right, so now we did one example. We also now want to do a couple more because that was just one type of question, right? So we're going to look at these two next topics, and we're going to ask, for those of you who said you were comfortable answering, we're now going to engage with you in a second here. So the first one we'll go over is a gender expression question. While watching TV with your child, a male identifying character is laughed at for wearing a skirt to school. So Dion, you want to move that over?
Yes.
And then, so I had Zaya could you unmute and answer a couple questions for us? If it's actually going to let me. I'm clicking unmute, but it doesn't appear to be unmuting.
Okay. Maybe try another person.
All right, we'll come back to Zaya. The other one was Robert. Robert, can you unmute?
Done.
Awesome. So Robert's with us. Great. So Robert, if you were presented with this question, what is an open-ended question you could ask the young person about this thing, this part of a television show that would get them talking about this specific instance?
What do you think about that individual wearing a skirt?
Okay, great. And then what's a value you think that an adult could share just about gender expression in general? So that a young person answers, what's something that could be shared?
What is the value? People identify or express themselves in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great one. And what is maybe a different topic that somebody could move into from this?
Oh, what are topics? You can move into gender identity. You can move in the pronoun thing, how one identifies, wishes to be spoken to. I'm really new at this, but
Well,
because
you're doing awesome.
I'm trying to get a handle on it because I'm a PE teacher.
Yeah, no, you're new, but that's fantastic. And thank you so much for stepping in to take a go at it. We appreciate it for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. I think that sometimes we have to have these really complicated conversations with people, but those were perfect answers. What do you think about that, kid? What do you think about the clothes they're wearing? What do you think about, how they're being treated right now? And those were great topics to move on to. Now we can talk about gender expression. Now we can talk about pronouns. There's so many things, and they don't have to be super complicated. We're going to try this again with another question. And this one is going to be, your child tells you someone was being annoying and touching them a lot at school. And so, of course, this brings up this brings up the topic of consent. So do we have a...
I do not see the other individual who said they were comfortable answering. Could someone really quick just put it in the chat box as the host, if you're comfortable going over this example?
Hi, my name is Zaya. I think you called on me earlier. I'm sorry,
awesome.
I missed that.
No worries. Perfect. Zaya, you're up. I'm sorry if I called you. I apologize, Zaya.
Not a problem.
Fantastic.
All right, Zaya. So your child tells you someone was being annoying and touching them a lot at school. So what are some ways that you can validate their feelings about that?
Yeah, I think first recognizing that it sounded like it really bothered them, that they were touching them at school. And then kind of truthfully, one of my first thoughts is wanting to ask kind of a question of, was anyone around, or did you ask them to stop, or things like that, thinking in a safe, kind of almost in like a safety plan way. But as I think of that, I don't like that question because I worry that it might make them feel like, oh, I should have done this, and this is kind of like my fault in a way. But then maybe asking a question or having a conversation or modeling, like if someone is touching you, practicing ways to say that they're not comfortable with that, and identifying people nearby that they would feel comfortable to kind of support them with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also safety planning, right? If that happens again. And you can also say, wow, that does say that does sound really annoying. Nobody should be
Mm-hmm.
touching like that. So what's an open-ended question you can ask to kind of begin a discussion on consent?
I think, what ways are you comfortable with, saying that you don't want to be touched? I think about like a variety of ways of saying that, I guess, but that might be not super open-ended.
No, actually, that reminds me. I had to go through this program called Safety Kids when I was in elementary school, and I
Mm-hmm.
sing the song "All You Got to Say Is No," and
Mm-hmm.
they teach you like 50 ways to say no.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things they don't say is just like your body language says no also.
Mm-hmm.
And what is a value or fact you can share about consent with your child?
I think I personally learned this one from Nanny, and that I loved from this parent. It was a 3-year-old set of twins, and one of the things we were going to do is I was going to give them a bath at the end of the day, and she reminded the kids that Zaya's in charge when you're here, but you are always in charge of your own body. And these kids were 3 years old, and I just loved that like, while the 3-year-old is going to listen to the adult in charge, they're always going to be in charge of their own body, and that's really stuck with me.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Sharing that was an amazing story. Okay, so we actually have about 1 minute, so we're going to move into the wrap up. Thank you again for our participants. I want to remind everyone that some topics that we covered, there's no such thing as the talk. Instead, there's lots of mini conversations that will cover a wide variety of topics that go way beyond basic reproduction, moving beyond just the where do babies come from conversation. And how we communicate during the discussions will be shaped by our own values. So we really need to know our values and know our priorities in our messages. And you do not have to be an expert to just show support.
So a couple challenges as you head out here. Just a reminder, we will stick around if you have more questions. Dion and I will, and to answer any questions we missed. But a couple things is to take it for yourself to the next step. Have a conversation with another adult, right? How do other adults feel about sharing sexuality values with a young person? That'll really help you also reflect on your own personal values when it comes to it, and your own personal sense of, how would I want to discuss it? I think with the last example, here's what I thought I might want to say, but I'm not sure that's a good answer. That's going to happen a lot. So that was a perfect example of like, you might think it's a good answer, and then you have to realize, oh, I'd actually like to discuss this. And then have a conversation with a young person about their definition of values, right? And whose opinion about their values are important to them. A lot of times adults think they know, but in reality, there are all kinds of messages that young people might be taking in. So having a sense of what is really important to them. And then in truth, a lot of times young people are just going to say, it's you, or it's this other trusted adult. But they just don't walk around constantly saying you're important to me and your values matter to me. All right, real quick as well, thank you for attending so much. If you would like to send feedback, please, you can see our email address there. Also, if you want more information, there's tons on our website. We'll also follow up with an email that has links to the rest of the sessions, but then also has a survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts on our session tonight to get a good sense of what worked really well for you. We'd love to hear that feedback.
Thank you so much. Again, this is the beginning of our first virtual series for parents and caretakers, and we're really happy to share it with everyone. And we will be here if anyone wants to chat in some questions or wants to unmute and ask us some questions.
All right. So getting a lot of thank yous, which we really appreciate, but I want to make sure we can get to these questions as well as we go. So I had one, Dion, here that was, I'm a teacher And when we talk about consent and boundaries, I always get asked about a parent that makes their child kiss family members, and it makes the child uncomfortable. And right now that this person is teaching them, the teacher's teaching about that their body's their body, right? And that not to be forced to do something that makes them uncomfortable. How do you approach that?
That is really interesting. I'm not sure if they mentioned the age of the child, but it might be time for the child to really sit their parent down and talk about how it makes them uncomfortable, and that they would prefer to be able to decide if they want to kiss relatives, because that is consent. They shouldn't be forced to kiss anyone that they don't want to. They shouldn't be forced to hug anyone that they don't want to. And I think it's a good time for them to talk to a parent about that. And just the way it's difficult for a parent to start a conversation about sexuality, it's very hard for a young person to start a conversation. And it might be awkward, and it might take a few different conversations until they kind of agree on something.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it's really tough for adults to, one, recognize that young people even do get to decide for themselves, especially that young, because there is so much control over a lot of elements of their life, but their body is their own body. The other thing is that for so many adults, it's just really tough to disappoint another adult. So for that parent really being able to say to a grandparent, hey, we're really working on making sure that, you know, so-and-so is being able to consent to things and is learning about control of their own body. So they may say they don't want to have a kiss right now. And so that's a conversation at the adult level that can be really difficult, but it's valuable for young people to get messaging from both their family and from the school and from other messages as well around consent and what their body, the ability to control their own body. I did get one, and this is a fair point because I think it definitely brings up the distinction between values and facts. So I was asked basically in regards to about teenagers not being good parents, it was, aren't there studies and statistics that really support that teenagers are bad parents? And I can start this one, Deanna, if you don't mind. I think really there's a couple things there, right? Even the value of bad, that's a value, right? Of what it is to be a quote unquote bad parent. So it's really tough. There are certainly studies potentially that show that maybe there are things that are more difficult for a young parent, right? Maybe things surrounding the ability to finish and graduate from high school. For instance, we know that it becomes much harder, or the ability to reach a certain economic level, or other things that are not values. So what is a bad parent in itself is a value. So there's no way to really statistically say teenagers are quote unquote bad parents.
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much that, only from a researcher point of view, that qualitative research really lies on this subjective definition. So it's a values question in the end.
Great, and these are great questions. We really appreciate them. And then just, Dion, could you review, how you would speak with the child who's being touched by a student at school and they don't like it, similar to our last example? What's an open-ended question that you would start with to start that consent discussion?
I think that it would depend on their age, for one. If we're thinking about someone that's very little, like maybe 4 or 5, I would want to know how often it's happening and how it makes them feel. So that would be a big open-ended question. How does it make you feel when this kid touches you? And if they're like, it makes me feel really angry, it makes me feel really mad, okay, then that's not okay. It's not okay for this person to keep touching you. So we're going to take steps to make this kid not touch you anymore. And so that might be like, as a parent, like me contacting the teacher, but also telling my child to verbally tell this kid, stop touching me.
And then the next one, how do you approach these topics with a younger sibling? that one's tough based on not knowing like full age difference, things like that. But it's very similar. I mean, if there's an adult, if the sibling is younger and the older sibling is an adult, you're looking at very similar ways. Use the closeness of the relationship. If it is a close relationship, use the fact that it's not the traditional like, oh, this is the parent and this is the sibling, right? That can open up and create a comfort level potentially, depending on the relationship. But it's very similar dynamics, right? It's being comfortable having the conversations, showing the young person that you want to have the conversations and you're happy to be a resource for them and happy to talk about those things. It's a lot of the same things, even if it's just a different family relationship than the sort of the parent child or older like grandparent or uncle relationship. Pretty much all the same things apply. It just there'll be, you know, a different relationship dynamic there.
Yeah, and they might even put a lot more value in what you have to say, especially if they're teenagers or preteens. An older sibling is someone that they look to as someone who is still young but is going through kind of the same things. So they're going to put a lot more like priority, more values in that.
And then we did get a question. I've gotten quite a few questions just about the video recording, and we will get that posted and then send out as well the ability how to access this for this webinar. So it will go up, and if you are on this, we have, you know, the ability to contact you, and we will add that and make that available. So it's definitely going up. Give us a little time to make sure to get it posted, but we'll once it goes up, we'll make sure to send out that communication that it is available. And then again, we're going to record all of them so that individuals can access this information if they want to share it with other people as well. And that is that's everything I have in the chat box. If anybody has a question that's difficult to chat, you can feel free now to jump in and ask us. You have you can unmute and say if you have a question.
All right, well, you can also email questions to education@ppil.org. Thank you so much for being a part of this first series, and we will see you all next week on Tuesday, same time.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.